Good evening, and welcome to Couch Conversations with the Doctors, where true health is wealth. So, what night is it? It's Monday night, and what is Monday night? It's Couch Conversations with the Doctors. So, remember to share, and share. I see we have Val Tally with us here. Chief Tally is here, and he's saying good evening to everyone. Welcome to our Monday night's Couch Conversations with the Doctors. As always, we're going to go around and we're going to introduce our esteemed panel to you on this evening. To my colleague and co-worker who always leaves me, and I know he's getting ready to leave now because it's getting cold in Chicago. That's our very own Dr. Douglas Graham. Dr. Graham.
Listen, I'm just doing my best to stimulate the economy by traveling, Nikki. I got to get my vitamin D, so I'm doing what I should be doing. I'm a retired physician. I worked in the western suburbs for 30 years and spent a couple of years working in the representative's office in Washington, D.C. I'm going to try and answer your questions as best I can. It's a real privilege and honor to be here.
Thank you so much. To the man who says that I threaten him every Monday, but guess what? He's always on time. That's our very own Dr. James Miller. Dr. Miller.
Oh, good evening. I think I'm going to begin to copy some of Doug's practice.
It's healthy.
To stimulate the economy. But we're happy to be here. And thanks, Nikki, and to the congressman for this forum that we are able to come together on Monday evening, discuss the issues of health in our community, and to do what we can to try to heal our community of these issues that are affecting people's health and their well-being. So we're here tonight, and hopefully we can add to someone, answer some question, and add maybe some insight that will be helpful for somebody.
Thank you so very much. But tonight he's hanging out with us from Tokyo. That's our very own Joseph. So,
you were fading in and out, but I think you were introducing me. I'm Joe Harrington, retired public health professional and healthcare administrator. I retired from the state health department where I was the regional health officer for Cook County and administrative law judge. Glad to be here. And I think the talk about vitamin D and the fact that we're going into winter means that some of us may want to consider supplement of vitamin D moving into the winter, since we're talking about health. African Americans seem to be vitamin D deficient. That's one commonality we seem to have, and I take a supplement of vitamin D every day.
To the man who's really a chef to $5, but he's a great physician who gets the job done. That's our very own Dr. P. Dr. P.
Hey, Nikki, thank you so much. I am honored with my esteemed guests and colleagues. Thank you for you and the Congressman for creating this forum for us. And I hope to answer as many questions as I can tonight.
Outstanding. And thank you so very much to our great guest that's here with us on this evening, which we really shouldn't consider her a guest because she's my great shopping buddy. That's our very own Dr. Ramona Burris.
Thank you, Nikki. It's a great pleasure to be here this evening with everyone, to be part of this esteemed panel. I too have a doctorate, but I have a doctorate degree in pharmacy. So I'm the drug dealer of the group, the odd man out. But definitely, looking forward to tonight's conversation to talk about not only professionally, but personally, how my life has been impacted by some of the disparities that we know exist in our communities.
Outstanding. And thank you so very much. I want to say hey to Audrey Jaycox that's here with us. She says hello to everyone. To Tasha J, who is here. She says good evening. To the man who's great weight loss guru physician. However, his dream is to really be the Wolfgang Puck of food. That's our very own Dr. Tony Hampton. Dr. Hampton?
Thank you, Nikki. Well, I'll be honest, I'm a recovering drug addict. I was once a drug addict when I started my career as a physician. I was trained to give drugs, do procedures and surgeries. I've now learned that that's not the path. So I'm happy that I've been recovering nicely. I'm still in rehab, and now I heal people with nutrition and diet and things of that nature. So I do understand the whole ideal of that, but I'm very happy to be here. Always happy to share my thoughts and share anything that's going to help our community heal. So thank you, Nikki and Congressman, for the opportunity.
Dr. Hampton,
Outstanding. To the man who
almost passed out over here. Almost, I was like,
Yeah,
where's he going with this?
Yeah, well,
I almost went out. I was like,
yeah, I hope as I wear my Xavier hat.
Clean this up, man. Clean it up.
That's right. Clean it up.
To the man who makes this possible for us every Monday, to the one who constantly teaches us that true wealth is health, that's the Congressman of the Illinois 7th Congressional District, our very own Congressman Danny K. Davis.
Well, thank you all. And I want to ask Joe Harrington, what does an administrative law judge do in healthcare?
Well, I'll answer that. It was really interesting. When I started working as a regional health officer for the state, it comes with the title of administrative law judge. And at that time, we did all the nursing home hearings for involuntary transfer and discharge. So I did probably 150 hearings a year, cases a year I would hear. When a nursing home wants to put a resident out, because they refer to him as resident because it's a nursing home, so they're actually not a patient, they have to file a notice of involuntary transfer or discharge. And the resident then has the right to have a hearing, and those are the hearings that I heard. Most of the cases were for non-payment.
So much of it is investigative work. Is that
in terms of the judge?
Yeah.
Oh, it's an actual hearing where usually nursing homes have a lawyer. Most of the residents, patients, they were pro bono. Sometimes they had a lawyer. So it would be an actual pre-hearing, possibly going into an actual hearing where I'd have to make a ruling on the evidence. So the evidence is just like you'd have a case anywhere else. Two sides argue. One of the most interesting, fascinating thing is trying to control lawyers, keep them in place, keep them in order, keep them from arguing with each other, and trying to help residents understand the law and what I could or could not do based upon.
So it's part of the civility of decision making, and information is provided, and then a decision ultimately gets made, that something happens as a result of that information being publicly aired. And so that's a part of the civility of our country, that and we haven't reached the epicenter in terms of it. We're still learning and still trying to learn, and still trying to create more effective ways, and ways that people would consider to be more fair. I had a gentleman in my office today. He felt that everything was against him, and that he had not been treated fairly. And he wanted to explore to the nth degree what the procedures suggested he could do in order to try and receive justice in his case. And while we oftentimes don't agree, we ultimately end up with some decisions being reached based upon what we call a rule of law. And we don't always have to have only attorneys doing that. So I have a tremendous amount of appreciation for that kind of inquiry, because that's really much of what we do in terms of the approach that is used to arrive at decisions that somebody got to make decisions all the time. And so these processes are continuously being developed that we can use to make decisions and hope that people will feel good about them. It's been a very interesting weekend for me. And it's always an interesting period of time when we are close to major decisions being made. We're going to make some very major decisions in the next few weeks that will determine the course of action for our country, perhaps for the next 20 years. And so those are decisions that will count. And let me thank you all for sharing information with our audience, because some of them will get information that will guide and direct their decisions. And that information gets reinforced. And I still say a good doctor, you don't want to be like Big J McShane, who's had this blues song. He says, I'm failing 5 degrees, and I know my time ain't long. My breath is getting shorter, and my health is almost gone. Then he says, don't send me no doctor, because the doctor can't do me no good. So he means that he's about to escape and move away. That we don't want to do. So thanks to all of you. You help us to stick around a bit longer. So thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, Elise Johnson says, happy Monday to all. Sheldon Flowers is here and he says, yes. Also, Louise Lawson is here and she says, hello, everyone, and thank you for sharing. Nellie Purnell King is here and she says, good evening to everyone. And I see Tia has stopped by just as well. And Tia says, hello, beautiful people. Well, hello to you just as well, Tia. And thank you so very much for being here with us. You know, September was Sickle Cell Month, and we did great informationals about sickle cell. October is Breast Cancer Awareness and Domestic Violence Month. And we've had some great conversations this month just as well. But we could not finish this month out without hearing from our very own Ramona Burris, as she tells us not only from a personal perspective on how she deals daily with her travels and her struggles that she deals with, but also as a pharmacist, what's great and what's new and what's on the uptake for patients who may be suffering from the same thing. Ramona, take it away.
Thank you, Nikki. And again, thank you for having me this evening. Maybe I'll start with a personal story. So at age 34, with no obvious risk factors, I was diagnosed with stage 2 breast cancer. It started because I felt a lump in my breast that I have to admit to that I ignored for probably about a month until it became painful. And it took me 3 conversations with my primary care provider for me to get in and be seen to have it assessed. Unfortunately, there's a lot of bias when it comes to how our healthcare system is shaped and sometimes how we're perceived in those spaces, whether it's a clinician or maybe the receptionist. But when I look at some of the disparity data around breast cancer and the fact that Black women are 40% more likely to die from something such as breast cancer, even though our rate of incidence or how much it impacts our community is very small compared to some of our white counterparts, but we're 40% more likely to die. And so going through my experience where I had to advocate for myself, to have my voice heard, to have my complaints heard by my primary care in order to get in and be seen. When I did get in for that initial primary appointment, I had the physician touching on my boob, right? She was trying to figure out what the lump was and what the next steps would be. And I actually had the clinician who was in the same practice as my primary care, but not my primary care. She uttered the words, "Well, I'm going to send you for a mammogram, but I'm going to do it because you have Blue Cross insurance. And so they're likely to pay for it." And so as I sat in the room, I was kind of like, my mouth dropped open, because like Dr. Pete and Dr. Maya, I grew up as a clinician in the HIV space. And so firsthand, I saw a lot of the disparities, and I saw a lot of the challenges with helping patients have successful outcomes in that space. And more often than not, it was more than just looking at that patient from a lab value perspective, looking at their CD4 and viral load, but really looking at that whole person who was in front of you, and maybe some of the psychosocial issues or behavioral issues, or even issues at home that could be impacting their success with HIV treatment, or just with dealing with the disease itself. And so that advocate that I was in that space, it was really hard for me to transfer it over to myself being a patient, but I had to be an advocate. And, again, I say implicit bias, and it's not a bad thing, because I think we're all conditioned by society to have biases, good, bad, indifferent, whatever. But I do know that likely impacted the level of service that I received just to get the diagnosis. Okay, so because I had the Blue Cross insurance, I got the mammogram done, and I was subsequently diagnosed with breast cancer. But what if I hadn't? What if I had been Ramona with the Medicaid? Would my story be different? And I wish I could say that was one isolated incidence in my care treatment, that, I encountered these obstacles, but it was not. I had issues when I chose to get the elective double mastectomy, going through chemo, choosing whether I would have a hysterectomy, and some of the other pieces. And unfortunately, after a year and a half of being deemed cleared of having cancer, I found out that I had a cancer that metastasized. And I wish I could say that it was because of follow-up with routine care with my partners who take care of me from an oncologic perspective. But it was because I was in bed with my youngest daughter, who was 9 at the time. She elbowed me and she chipped my front tooth. Now, mind you, when I was first going through cancer, the first time, I was going through a divorce. So there were many life changes. So now, a year and a half, 2 years later, I don't have a front tooth. So I like to make jokes out of everything, because if you can't laugh, it's not worth it, right? So I remember telling my daughter, I'm like, "How am I find you a new daddy?" And that's a horrible joke, but that was my joke at the time, if I don't have any front teeth, right? So long story short, I went to my dentist, who sat me down to fit me for an implant. And I remember he had a fancy CT machine in his office. And as he was looking at my bone structure to see where the implant could be placed, he saw some opaqueness. And at that point, he said, "Ramona, go follow up with your oncologist." And sure enough, I found out that the cancer had not metastasized any of my gynecological regions, because that's typically what we see when a person has breast cancer at a young age, but it metastasized in my jaw bone, and subsequently my hip bone as well too. And so I share that story as not like a woe is me, because I'm still here and I've surpassed my expiration date, but it definitely has given me purpose, because as I move in many different spaces, I hear many Black women like myself who have the same experience. I hear many Latinas that have the same experience. And so we really have to just address the elephant in the room when it comes to how are we being perceived across the counter or across the table from our clinician, and is there an opportunity for us to do better? When I think about disparity data, we so much look at the social determinants of health. We talk about, it's the folks who don't have the education, the folks who don't have insurance, the folks who don't know no better. But again, I've got many people who have the same number of degrees as I do, same amount of student loans, crazy debt as I do, the same loud voice that I do, and we still find difficulties. So I'm glad that we're having a conversation tonight. And Dr. Hampton, I'm glad you talked about, being a recovering addict, because it's real. There are opportunities for us to have non-pharmacologic interventions when it comes to cancer, when it comes to many other diseases. I like when this group always talks about how do we prevent, because if you look at, whether it's cancer or heart disease, a lot of these processes are driven by chronic inflammation in our body. So really, looking at our family history and saying, how can I do better? How can I not pass this on to myself and to my kids, and really have different outcomes, compared to what our parents and what our grandparents are going through. But Mr. Harrington, I know you were a former member of PCORI, and I have to say it's been my personal journey with breast cancer that's pushed me to advocate for more representativeness and clinical trials. And Ms. Harvey knows that I lost 3 years of my life to COVID and vaccines with one large pharma company, but really to, advocate for us, folks of color, to be represented in the research. Because, we always hear, oh, Black and brown folks don't want to be part of research because it's Tuskegee. We know that research has a complicated history in our community, but if we're not part of that data, then we're not part of the output. So a lot of times these drugs come to the market and we don't know the nuances of, are there going to be needs for different doses or different side effects experienced by different populations? Because the issue is we are different. It's not really along race and ethnic lines, but if we look at it from a ancestral and genetic components, we are different, and drugs work differently in us. Diseases and health conditions manifest differently across our different communities. So it's important for us to be part of research to understand not only how a drug may work, but also for scientists and researchers to learn more about the disease itself. Because if that drug comes on market, again, you may not have been reflected in that data, but guess what? That data has been used to drive clinical guidelines that I know a lot of the clinicians here use to, treat their patients. And you're going to be part of research either in that phase 2, phase 3 space, or when that drug comes to market, and we just don't know how it may impact the community. So I say that, Mr. Harrington, because I think it's really important for us to keep pushing not only drug companies, but pushing our communities to understand why it's important for us to be part of the research. Because if we're not part of it, then we're, again, not part of that equation or that output. But Nikki, I'll stop there because I can keep going on and on forever. But I think it's even more so important as we look at, different spaces within oncology and cancer. We could talk about prostate cancer. I know Dr. Mason talks about that all the time. But, there are new emerging therapies that can even be preventative in many spaces. But again, we have to be in those spaces in order to know whether it's going to have a positive impact on our communities.
Ramona, quick question. When you shared that it metastasized, can you explain what the metastasize is to our viewers?
Yeah.
And can you also share what stage that would be?
Yeah. So, okay, if I go through my entire experience, so before I had the initial surgery for the first diagnosis of cancer, by imagery, it was thought to be stage 1 because it was only a few tumors that were located within the imagery. But when the surgeon actually went in for the mastectomy, where they're removing actual breast tissue to, remove any cancerous tissue and cancerous cells, it was deemed to be stage 2 because there was stuff kind of hiding in those images. And I like to remind, women of color that just because you have a nodule or if there's some abnormality in the imaging, that doesn't always necessarily mean it's cancer, but it's important for us to find out because we have denser breast tissue. And so things kind of look funky in the pictures. And sometimes you may need that next step, whether it's a MRI, which is a different type of imaging, or a biopsy, just to confirm whether or not, it is indeed cancer. So a lot of us get those abnormal scans. But more often than not, it's not cancer. But if it is cancer, the ask is that we catch it early enough so that we have a higher likelihood of surviving. So with me, I had cancer in my left breast localized. It didn't spread to my lymph nodes. It wasn't part of the right breast either. But I chose to have a double mastectomy where I had the breast tissue removed from both breasts because I was 34. So the likelihood of having a recurrence was higher. And to be honest with you, I think Angelina Jolie was going through her journey through, breast cancer risk and having her double mastectomy. So I was influenced by a celebrity, even though I'm a clinician, right? That definitely influenced my decision. But unfortunately, cancer cells love to travel. They travel in our lymphatic system, they travel in our bloodstream, and they just land where they land. So sometimes you'll see folks who initially start off with breast cancer who may potentially have cervical cancer, or sometimes it travels to the liver. But cells just like to go all over the place. Cancer cells love to replicate fast. So unfortunately, there were some that must have not been killed off by my chemotherapy, and they chose to land in my jaw. And again, when I think about the routine follow-up appointments for my breast cancer, it was just basically focused on my gynecological reasons because my cancer was deemed to be hormone receptor positive, which meant that my estrogen was feeding it. And so again, keeping it localized there. But unfortunately, these cells, they land wherever they land. So it was another opportunity for me to kind of be a case example of, we got to make sure we're looking at that whole patient, not just the patient based on, what guidelines may dictate, but really looking at, that true patient in front of you and their risk, and really monitoring them holistically. And so that's what metastasize means, is that it was initially, localized in one space, but that cancer then traveled to another part of the body. And so you would think that because it's in my bone, that it would be called bone cancer. But no, we always stick to the cancer of origin. So it's breast cancer that's metastasized, and traditionally we call it stage 4.
Thank you so very much. Oh, go ahead, Pete.
Ramona, thank you so much for sharing this. And as one of my colleagues, it's funny how you know people, and then again you say, I don't know people. I'm like, I've never heard this, and I've seen you in so many in professional and social circles, but I've never heard you share your stories. Thank you so much for coming to share. But what would you share with working women who sacrifice so much for their families and our community? What would you share with them, young women and women who are presently at the age of being screened? What would you share? What is the sort of, man, if I only knew what?
Yeah, I would encourage women of all ages just to listen to your body. If I think about traditionally who breast cancer impacts, it is that woman who's going into menopause, so age 40 or over, which is why that doctor said to me, like, oh, thank goodness you got Blue Cross, because, again, looking at guidelines, I was 34. I didn't have any family risk. I didn't have any other, obvious risk factors that we know could be associated with breast cancer. So it may not have been a reimbursable, referral. And that, it sucks, right? That goes to show, like, there's a larger issue with our healthcare system. But with Black women, we're finding that our younger women are getting cancer at higher rates and more aggressive forms of cancer. Triple negative breast cancer, one of the most aggressive ones where there's limited treatments, it's impacting our community disproportionately. I think the last stat that I saw is that Black women, and when I say Latino women, remember that, the Black diaspora is huge. So, we have Latino women who are of African ancestry who get lumped into the stats as well, too. But for triple negative breast cancer, Black women, young Black women under 40, are 200% times more likely to have triple negative diagnosis than, again, our white counterparts. And so it starts with just knowing your body, what's normal and what's not. I don't care if it's something such as a lump. I don't care if it's sorry guys, that you're on the stage, but I don't care if it's a vaginal discharge. If something ain't right, call your doctor. When Dr. Hampton talked about, his choice to stop taking meds and things, I want folks to know that you have that right, but please consult your clinician, whether it's your, physician or advanced nurse practitioner. Talk to somebody before you make those kind of decisions, because that really, you got to have an informed party to kind of help you figure out how you can pivot. But listen to your body. And if you're not getting heard by that clinician, just like how, I may swipe somebody on, Plenty of Fish and Tinder, you have the right to date your doctors. Find that doctor that's going to be the perfect fit.
No, we didn't go there. Did you just go there?
Yes, we go there. Because again,
okay.
It could be a situation where I'm shopping at Nordstrom's and I may get bad customer service and I'll be quick to pop off and blah, blah, blah. But do we do that, in the healthcare space? So really empowering women, know your body, advocate for yourself. If you can't do it, bring somebody with you, to kind of help be that other ear as, you're having discussions with your clinician. But then two, for women, take the cape off. We suffer from, I can save everybody. What do they tell us on the airplane? You got to put your mask on first if you're going to save everybody. So I think that's another big thing that us as women, because I still struggle with it, how to be vulnerable. Maybe if I was more vulnerable, I'd still be married. But, I think that's something that, is important for us as we're going through health conditions. But even, as we're just dealing with life issues in general, know your body, advocate for yourself, but be vulnerable as well.
Outstanding. Al Marshall Ellis says good vibes. The Facebook user says good evening, everyone. I think that's got to be Linda. And it's just coming up a little crazy for her today. Audrey Tanksley is here tonight. Dr. Tanksley is here. the president of the Cook County Physicians Association. Hey, Audrey. She says, thank you for sharing your story. Ramona with the big old heart. Tia Reed says, thank you for sharing, Ramona. Keep sharing far and wide. Louise Lawson says, thank you, Dr. Burris. I really needed that. I had 2 sisters that died of breast cancer. Wonderful. And says, thank you so much. I am also a breast cancer thriving survivor. And of course, that Facebook user's name, she said, yep, that's me. We got an inbox that says, I'm not praising cancer, but I gotta say, Ramona, you make it look good. All right.
I drew my eyebrows on today because I don't have any eyebrows thanks to my chemotherapy. But yeah, I drew them on for you.
Love it.
All right. Well, not sure. Oh, don't worry about why it's not showing up. I know it's you when that pops up, so don't even worry about it. That's our Linda. Yes. Don't bombard us with the questions all at one time, but go right ahead and ask your questions. And I got an odd inbox. So Tony, I kind of want to take a minute because I want you to clear up the drug addict comment. Because
it's my fault. It's my fault, audience. I kicked it off by saying I'm a drug dealer, and
That's
yeah,
right.
Dr. Tony's joke just didn't land well with some
That's
people,
right.
so.
That's right. Yeah. In my world,
I just want you to clear that up a little bit.
yeah, let's clear it up. In the world I live in, I really was trained to diagnose, treat with medicines, procedures, and surgery. And what I found myself doing is so focused on medications that I didn't realize I wasn't really healing people. If I was a large company, it would make more sense for me to have a person on drugs continuously. And one of the large investor, I don't want to name a company, but one of the large financial institutions which funded Harvani, which is the drug that reverses hepatitis C, sent a memo to them that clearly stated that great job on what you've done to, literally cure a disease, which is very rare in healthcare from a drug, right? But they then said, it's not a good business model. So think about that. So they're sending a memo that is public, that they're so brazen. It's like, we're telling you that in spite of your success, because guess what? If you cure all these people, how are we going to impress our stockholders? So I'm not afraid to say I was a drug dealer, in that I was not understanding that drugs was not the key. Now, having said that, you need drugs as bridge therapy. So for many conditions that are chronic, you can simply take the drug to, get you out of the storm. And if you have one of those chronic medical conditions that I think are reversible, including your blood pressure and hypertension, and you can greatly reduce your risk for things like dementia and things, and heart attack and stroke. So if you have a condition that's reversible, polycystic ovarian syndrome being another, then why not take the drug? And then once you have adopted the lifestyle, if you're capable of doing it, and I think most of us are, then you can kind of wean yourself off the drug. Not good for business, but it's good for the people we serve. So once I understood what I was doing wrong, I said, let me change the narrative to one where I'm not critical of pharmaceuticals. I think we need them. I'm not critical of healthcare systems that have indoctrinated this belief that you have to use drugs. That is just the nature of our healthcare system. We need to change the paradigm to what is the reason why you have cancer? Why did Ramona get breast cancer in the first place? And can we then take that information and bless our daughters and our nieces with that information so that they won't have to go through all of this stuff that Ramona went to? It's just crazy. So that's kind of where I'm at with that. And now that I figured it out, my goal is to stand on the rooftop and share with everybody that you don't have to be sick. And if you get sick, if you adopt a healthy lifestyle, you will recover much better than you otherwise would have. Now, what I really appreciate tonight is that Dr. Ramona has reminded us that people of color don't have access to health care like everybody. It's just a reality. People of color and because you don't have access, because people say, well, why are Black women dying? Well, because they don't have access. And by the time they get access, their stages of disease are far downstream and at a stage where at times you can't save them. So what we have to do is continue to educate. We need our leadership, like the congressman, to do all he can to make sure we have access. We need health systems to make sure they're asking the right questions about social determinants of health. If you don't ask the question, people will not necessarily share the information. And part of that education is to say, why would you do radiation or chemo or whatever? Other times in our community, people are afraid of this stuff, and they're like, I'm just going to pray about it, and that's all they do. But you know what? God gave us doctors that you pray for help, and they're right there with the information that'll help you. But because we misinterpret, I think, what we're supposed to do with that faith, we end up making decisions that don't allow us to take advantage of what's in front of us. So I really encourage everybody, be your own detective until the world becomes warmer and fuzzier and where you're being treated equally. You have to advocate for yourself, because if you don't, then you may find yourself getting left behind. But thankfully, we have people in the world, like the panel members, who care about you, who love you, and who will do all they can to make sure you get the help you need.
Yeah, I'd like to jump in. And first, I want to commend Ramona for sharing her story. One of the things that my sister always likes to point out, she is a strong Black woman, and Ramona is a strong Black woman. So I want to make that clear. And just a couple of things. One is, and I've never really understood it, but you can understand it because there's no reason for it. And that's the fact that while Black women are less likely to get breast cancer, they're more likely to die from breast cancer. That has nothing to do with race. It has a lot more to do with systematic racism, things like unconscious bias and things like that. So we're not dying sooner than other people because we're Black, but there are things inherent in the system that create conditions that allow us to get sicker and die prematurely. The other thing, and it's important to point out, and she sort of made the point, but I want to make it a little bit clear. Cancer takes its name from where it occurs. If it occurs in the breast, it's breast cancer. If it occurs in the prostate, it's prostate cancer. So it really gets its name from the site of origin. That doesn't mean that it's specific to that site. And that's what Ramona was saying, that if you get cancer somewhere, it's a possibility that cancer could spread to someplace else in the body. So you're really going to get on top of it early. And I'm going to echo just a few things because I did a lot of work with Dr. Mason. Dr. Mason would say, he would point out that there's no disease in its earliest state that produces a symptom. Cancer doesn't produce any symptoms. It's an uncontrolled growth of cells that happens at a cellular level. By the time it gets to be a mass, that means it's already out of control. It's grown big enough to create a problem, and then you have a symptom. So that's why Dr. Pete and Dr. Tony are around Dr. Douglas, Dr. Graham, Dr. Miller. That's what they do to some degree. They can help you identify something early and get on top of it becomes a more serious problem. And the last thing, and again, this is something that Dr. Mason would say, is we don't have a healthcare system. We have a disease detection and management system. That's where the money is. Detecting disease and then managing the disease. There's more money in that aspect of healthcare than there is, and that's what Dr. Hampton was talking about in terms of curing people. Because the healthcare system does depend upon people presenting with an illness, and if they're lucky, an illness that they might be able to manage for 40, 50 years.
So it's the disease management and what else is
disease it? Detection and management. They detect the disease and then they manage the disease.
Detective
Detection and management.
System. All right. Just want to remind you guys that 1 in 8 women will have some form of a breast cancer. So remember, next time you go to church, next time you go to the doctor, next time you're at your family function, count the women in the room. 1 out of 8. And I also want to remind you guys, over 800 men a year are diagnosed with breast cancer just as well. So we cannot leave our men out. Over 800 men are diagnosed. So like Ramona said early, pay attention to your body. It's yours. No one knows your body like you do. Pay attention to your body. And with saying that, we're going to go to a private comment where the young lady says, Danny, Congressman Danny, I love you. And thank you for this Monday night informational. Dr. Burris, thank you as well. My daughter was diagnosed at 27 with breast cancer. It was like, okay, so I can't say that word because it was a little, she put in a little profanity. So what I'm going to do is just skip over that and say, I think she was having a problem with getting mammograms for her daughter because she was 27. And she's just sharing her thoughts on in flavoring conversation, how she had a hard time getting the opportunity to get a mammogram for her daughter. And finally, when they got it, she was positive for breast cancer. And she had stage 3 breast cancer at 27. What is the problem? And her question goes on to say, what is the problem with just granting a mammogram? Why are insurance companies have their panties in such a bunch over just a simple test? Is it the cost? What is it? Dr. Pete, let's talk about the cost of a mammogram.
Well, so without insurance, a mammogram, depending on whatever part of the country you're at, it can range between $150 to $600. And while people on this panel, it may not be a large amount of money, but when people are struggling to make ends meet, and you got a car note, you got your rent, you got utilities, you can see where you might be able to justify in your brain to postpone that, to say, I'm not going to fight with the insurance companies about it. What I will say is this, and I'm not justifying their reasoning, but I will say, like my colleague said, they're in the business of a business. This is, I tell this to my patients. I'm like, whatever insurance company you have, while the face of it might appear as if we're allowing you to have access, they want to deliver dividends to the shareholders. They are in the business of business. It just so happened that business happens to be healthcare. Like Pet Boys sell oil and stuff to clean your tires with. They sell healthcare, and they pay us, doctors, nurses, hospitals, pharmacists, to deliver that care. But their job is to pay the least amount as possible to still turn a profit. And it's amazing. Some of my patients, they get shocked, and I'm like, yeah, I was shocked too. This is after I had finished med school and all the rest of this, and I'm like, I'm in too deep now. but what I can do is honor my patients by fighting for them. And I can't tell you how many women and men that I fought for that's just like Ramona, but Dr. Ramona, but with less resources, less empowerment, less, they didn't have anybody fighting for them. And so it was on me to fight for them, because I knew that the system is fighting for the dollar. The system wants to spend the least amount of money and hope and pray that you are healthy at the end of that. Because what they don't want also is that they don't want to pay for the mammogram, but they also don't want to pay for the invasive breast cancer that might land you in the ICU, and the cost of care just. So they're like hedging a bet on spend less and hope for the best. Come on now, that's a sermon right there now.
Come on, Bishop. Come on.
Let me just say one thing, and this is my second controversial statement.
Yeah.
I'm going to go and say it. I
hold
believe.
on, hold on. Think about your statement.
I'm
Because
gonna
I
say
don't want
it.
to read 10 comments.
It's on LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. No, I don't really care. Actually, listen. This is what I'm trying to say. Our current health model is broken. So again, I said earlier that we have a model of disease maintenance. Dr. Terry Mason completely agrees with that when he comments. I have a problem with a system where I remember when we used to watch these old programs and they would, you would literally have the mob that would be between you and that business. And you couldn't really, the business couldn't even run because the mob wanted their cut. I can't, for the sake of my brain, understand why do we have to have a middleman? Why can't we just provide care to people without the middleman? They take their profit and then they tell us how to use the money we just gave them. There's something wrong with that. It's a fundamental problem with that. So you can say it's capitalism and that's the way, it's the American way, but that is a fundamental right to have health care. So in my opinion, I think that's one of the biggest flaws. And until we get rid of the middleman, we're going to continue to have problems because we have to pay them. They have to make a profit. These are good people just trying to make a living. So I don't have a problem with the individuals in Humana, Blue Cross, or whoever. But that model is always going to restrict care. No matter how you color it, you can make it all fancy. So we need to eventually get to a model where certain things in society are a human right. I think healthcare is a human right. And that's why every other industrialized country on the planet makes it a human right. So until we get to that point, we're going to struggle. And our job is to advocate for you. Your job is to advocate for yourself until we get to the point where that is the norm. Now, again, in a dysfunctional system, you have to survive. So we don't just fuss about it. We do, try to change things. But until we change, we do not sit around and just get sick. If you go into any ER, they have rules. You have to be seen. In this country, if you're sick, you have to be seen. You have to shop around, as was suggested earlier. If you have a clinician who's not listening to you, you need to shop around. You are a customer before you're a patient, and you need to act like a customer. And if you're not happy, you need to shop around until you get somebody in front of you who's hearing you.
Yeah. Well, one of the things, let me just add this, Tony. The first problem is that, as you stated, that these companies are in business to make money, not for you, but for themselves. That's number one. Number two is that the average patient doesn't really see that. It may not necessarily understand that. They feel that, I'm paying my insurance or whatever the situation is, that it should, once I come to the attention of a healthcare provider, or I should be able to get what I need in order to be healthy or to be helped in whatever manner I need that help. And that's the way, people would think of it, and not really that my life and my health should be at a cost, or it should be at risk of what somebody else consider that they need. So there's a competition for the dollar. They want the dollar for their shareholders, and the patient needs that dollar that they have actually paid already to provide the good health care that they need. And so, so that's the conundrum that we're in now. And I agree that unless we change the system so that the profit of healthcare is no longer there, that we are going to continue to deal with that issue of how do I get what I need? How do any patient get what they need when they need it? Why is there an objection to a person, to Dr. Ramona getting a mammogram? And as you said, they have these rules that are set up based on some statistics that women of this age generally don't have breast cancer, so we aren't going to approve the procedure. And so you only get it easily if you're 40, 45 years of age. But if you're less, and as she said, if you're less than the 45 and you have it, I mean, it's 100% for you. But for them, they don't look at it that way. They're looking at it in terms of you compared to 1,000 other women. And so part of it is that you got a failed system where it's driven by the economy and is driven by people desire to make money. And so we have to be able to get beyond that, and the humanistic feelings that we have for each other and one another should overrule that. However, in this capitalistic society, that doesn't always work, and I think that's what we are up against.
Well, you know, many health economists suggest that if we were to change the system, that we in all likelihood might end up with greater shortages of health personnel, because certain kind of incentives drives people to do things that sometimes might be out of the ordinary. For example, many individuals who earn higher education degrees, that it might take a longer period of time, and the incentive for some of that is at the end of the day. The more you know, the more you can earn. I mean, a super specialist who may have studied something, you know, for 7 or 8 years before they became the specialists that they became, might not spend the 7 or 8 years on pure intellectual curiosity or scientific discovery, unless at the end of that there is some reward that otherwise they wouldn't have.
Yeah. Well, I can see that you know, there are certain situations and things that may be driven by by economics, but I think that there are enough people that have a caring spirit about themselves that we will still have plenty of people that want to care for people and want to provide care for people. I don't think that we'll come up short on that end. I don't think the individual specialists and doctors are the one that are really making the money. It's the companies, it's the insurance industry, it's the pharmaceutical industry. That's who is capitalizing on this on these situations.
Yeah, and I think we can learn from the countries who have been successful. Like I understand we have a lobbyist-driven system that, you know, people legally can pay to get their view in front of people. I make a good living, but I don't have the resources of Humana, Blue Cross, and Aetna, right? So I think I understand that. But if we can look at what other countries have done successfully, and what I learned when I was the medical director for our advocate operating system, which really is about process improvement and things of that nature, you don't take any model and make it your own. What you do is you have the bones of a model, and then you take that model and you tweak it to fit your particular needs. I think it's almost like when it comes to economics, when you think about when I tell people cauliflower rice, which is 4 carbs, versus regular rice, which is 45 carbs, the difference between 11 teaspoons of sugar and 1 teaspoon of sugar. When I go into the grocery store at Walmart, anybody can do that. Why do you see like a whole section of the grocery store with cauliflower products? That's because it's supply and demand. We're brilliant people in this country, and we're innovative, and we will figure out how to make money on any system that we put in front of people. But we can't make money something that determines a person's health. You can't lose anywhere from 50 to 70,000 people a year for lack of health care and think that's okay. That's not okay. And when you go to other countries who do have health care, and in fact, the country I mentioned when I was, giving Dr. Mason a hard time, how Hong Kong eats meat. Hong Kong eats meat, And we're talking about they live a long time. But one of the reasons why they live a long time is not because they eat meat, it's because they have access to health care.
Yeah.
So that's the real issue. And so it's not about the meat and the plants. It's about, I can see my doctor. And that reduces my overall stress. I'm not saying no to the ambulance because I can't afford. I'm afraid of the $250 copay. What kind of country do we?
900. What are you doing?
Well, that's a copay. It's a copay. Is the copay 900? So so it depends. So that's all I'm saying. I think that there's we can compromise if we were in a position to make these decisions. I just think that we should never give up on that dream. And if you may say, well, 50,000 people died for lack of health care. But if that one of those 50,000 is your family member, that's going to be a big deal to you. So we can't ignore these things and act like they don't happen. We need to make change towards improving that. And if we have to compromise in some way where we work with the insurers to come up with a better model, but whatever that model is, everybody needs to be covered.
Yeah,
I just want to piggyback on something that Dr. Tony said. And the Commonwealth Fund has put out a series of reports called Mirror Mirror. And one of the things that they point out, and they make very clear, we don't have the best healthcare system in the world. We have the most expensive healthcare system in the world because we don't get the best outcomes in the world. We pay more for healthcare, but we don't have the best outcomes. And there are things that we could and should do so that we can get a healthcare system that's more equitable, that allows access to primary care to everyone at no cost. There are things we can do with the amount of money we spend. It's just where that money goes.
Yeah.
And who gets rich off some of that money.
Yeah. And the only other thing I wanted to add to that is that a lot of things that are ignored at an early stage end up costing more in the long run. People who have elevated blood pressure that is not treated end up causing them to have heart disease, strokes, kidney failure. And ultimately, the cost is much higher than if we had just taken care of the blood pressure, made access to care more available to that individual and provided that care. Over the long haul, it would have been the management would have been less costly than allowing them to end up with
end-stage disease.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And I'm just I do want to share this really quickly so we can be very transparent about when we talked about just came up about the copay, that number. There's a couple insurance companies out here that shall stay nameless. That copay may be anywhere between $200 to $350. But if the insurance company doesn't deem you taking that ambulance as an emergency, or there was no pre-authorization. I don't know how you want a pre-authorization for an ambulance, but if there was no pre-authorization for that ambulance, your copay is then $900 for that particular ambulance. And I get those cases a lot when they come in with these bills and the insurance company says, well, it wasn't pre-authorized for this. I'm still trying to figure out how do you pre-authorize dialing 911 and then billing out the insurance company. But that's why we need to be awake to things. We're going to grab Connie's question real quick. Mr. Brown, I see your question. L. Marshall Ellis says, don't forget the men. You are absolutely right. Let's not forget those men. But Connie Taylor says, and Chief Val Talley says there was a great question. I think he was talking about the question that the young lady asked about her 27-year-old daughter. But Connie Taylor says, doctors, can you address and tell us more about fibroids and fibrocystic breast?
Yeah, I'll just say that when you have inflammation, inflammation will wreak havoc on the surrounding tissues. That'll then lead to growth of those tissues. Sometimes that growth is in the form of cysts. Sometimes that is in the form of fibroids. So people say, why do you call yourself the metabolic health doc? And metabolic health is when you have a good blood pressure, blood sugar, triglycerides, HDL, and your waist is not too round, right? The reason why is because you get metabolic disease because of too much insulin. And you have too much insulin because you have too much stress, not enough sleep, and you're eating foods that require insulin. So the point of it is, if we fix our diet and not have all this hyperinsulinemia, and you won't have metabolic syndrome. Metabolic syndrome is what causes those medical conditions that were just mentioned. So the goal is, if I am at risk, like if I'm a young girl, I may have polycystic ovaries where I have cysts on my ovaries. Those girls always, if they don't have a lifestyle change, if they don't know how to do that, will end up with fibroids and a risk for uterine cancer and breast cancer. And it's all the same disease. It's inflammation, inflammation, inflammation. So that's how I see this. And the way you address it is to reduce the inflammation. I reduce it with low carb. Dr. Mason reduces it with low fat. We all reduce it with exercise, reduce stress, positive relationships, increase sleep, being around people in a community that cares about us, and stop watching the news and doing all this crazy stuff that makes our life difficult. Now, I'm blessed. I live in a neighborhood. I sat on my deck yesterday for 4 or 5 hours because I knew that was the last Sunday I'd probably be able to do it. But I can do that safely. So if we live in communities of color, a lot of times you can't do that. And that's one of the reasons why we're sick. So, but what we do is we try to do all the things that we can control to feel safe. So that may mean sitting in the house, instead of watching the news, you watch Andy Griffin. And you watch Andy Griffin and Opie and the rest of them, because that won't stress you out. So, but anyway, I'll stop with that. But I'm going to tell you, if we understand why we get sick, again, get into the root cause, we won't have fibroids, and we won't have cysts in our breast that'll freak us out and make us think we have breast cancer.
And our hour has drawn near, but I gotta say this, and Tony, I love you. I live in a community of color. I am Black all day. I am Black. Okay. I love being Black. I have no proclivities with being Black, and I sit outside all the time.
Amen.
I'm just not gonna have it.
Amen to that. I like that.
So we can sit outside. Black people like to sit outside too. We can sit outside in our communities and not have crime is everywhere. One thing I will agree with is when we watch the news, we get all discombobulated. And that's because you're watching the local news and you think everything here is just falling apart. That's the same newscast in all 50 states. Understand that there is crime everywhere. There is no great hope coming to fix anything for you. You have to fix your own communities. You've got to go outside and fix them. And that's what I do. And that's why I can sit outside on my porch and be fine. That's why I can invite people over. Some of us on this panel know they have been here to my house. We have set out with no problems because I ain't having it. So with that being said, we have a lot of people who are chiming in. I want to let Mr. Brown know. Mr. Brown, we did not forget your question. Dr. Mason should probably be back on next week. Not that any of the other doctors here couldn't answer your question, but we're going to table your question until Dr. Mason is here so you can get his expertise. And then we can let the other doctors chime in with him just as well. But you said, good evening. I just turned 40 and I would like to know how I can increase my blood flow without the blue pill. Why does the blood flow increase with age? Or maybe you meant decrease with age. So I will make sure that we save that question and we will attack your question on next week. You guys hate when I say it, but here it is. Our hour has drawn near. Buck says, always late to the party. Well, Buck, you can watch the party in a few minutes when we go off. You can watch it from the beginning. With the cost of blood tests, why aren't more common diseases like Alzheimer's detected early? We'll attack that on next week just as well. We definitely will. And Ty says, all of you, thanks for all of you doing great things and the great work. So thank you so very much. Sandra Brown says, thank you, Dr. Hampton. And all the panel, it is critical to minimize your stressors. You are absolutely right. So I'm going to have to work on some of my stressors. Because I probably got metabolic So we got to work on some of that stuff. As we always do, we go around and we asked our panel. We had some technical difficulties and we lost some people who were here. We're going to go around our panel and we ask until next Monday. So Joe Harrington, what do you want to leave all the viewers and our listeners with until next Monday?
A couple of things. One of the things, because we were talking about breast cancer and people being able to get screening, the Illinois Breast and Cervical Cancer Program does provide free screenings at no cost to women that are eligible. So information about that program is available on the Illinois Department of Public Health's website. So there are people there that should take advantage of that if they need it. Mine for next week is really going to be a shout out to Dr. Ramona. I want to commend her on her
Thank you.
story and remind people that she believed in herself enough to take care of herself. And so I'm going to leave you with these words. If you believe in yourself, anything is possible. And Ramona proved it.
Thank you.
Absolutely. All right, you just took Dr. Mason's place. We don't even miss him now, Bishop. You came on in and gave us a text. All right, Dr. Douglas Graham, you're until next Monday.
Well, I'm just going to say that I've really been impacted by what Dr. Tony and Dr. Mason have to say. And so this weekend, I went out to lunch with my wife, and you get a choice of sandwiches or salad. And I like pork sandwiches, right? But they had a vegetarian option. So I said, I'm going to choose vegetarian. I think that's the way that we approach some of these problems, because too much red meat, too many processed foods leads to these kinds of conditions. So when you go out to eat and you look at the menu, you can choose vegetarian and start on that trail.
There you go.
All right. Thank you so much. Dr. Miller, you're until next Monday.
Well, I'm going to take a message from Dr. Ramona as well. And that is, one of the things that she pointed out is awareness. We need to be aware of our body. We need to be aware of what is going on with our body. And we need to be aware of what we can do, and to do that as quickly as possible. Be aware, people.
All right. Be aware. Dr. Tony Hampton, you're until next Monday.
A couple of comments. The first is going back to you saying that you sit outside your home. I was recently.
Because I like black people. I do. I sit outside. I like black people.
I want you to. But a lot of times it's perception. So there's this perception that New York and Chicago and Los Angeles are the most dangerous places to live. But I looked up, I was doing research for a video, and they listed the top 10 murder rate locations in the country. Number 1 was Mississippi. Number 2 was Louisiana, Kentucky, Alabama, Missouri, South Carolina, New Mexico, Georgia, Arkansas, Tennessee. There was no Chicago, there was no New York, and there was no Los Angeles.
Absolutely.
So it's just something to think about, which I think is profound. The second thing I want to say is me and Dr. Mason are different in terms of how we're trying to help people achieve metabolic health. He's low fat, I'm low carb. I want to be very clear. People who live long do both. Hong Kong, they eat meat. They live longer than any other part of the world. Blue zones, they live long. So you can do it any way. You just have to eat real food, less sugar, less processed food. If you do that, you'll be fine. Number 3, I'm going to probably share a video for Mr. Brown, who asked about blood flow for men. I got to do that because I'm a man and I don't want him to have to wait another week to get that answer. So I did do a video.
Well, while you done found him a video, I want you to find that link for the free breast and put that up there too.
That's a good point. We need to do both. So we're going to take care of the men and the women. So I'll share a link on Facebook, YouTube, with a video with a guest I had on the podcast who talks about resources that you can utilize to improve flow. Not enough time to go into detail about supplements right now, but I'll share that so people can at least get started on their journey. And other than that, I really enjoyed being with you guys tonight, and let's keep doing it.
Outstanding. So Buck says amen to all. Willie Potts invited some people, but she also told us who else was watching along with her, which was Jacqueline Potts, Linda Potts, Sandra Potts. The whole Potts family was out here. So thank you so much. Audrey Jaycock says, thank you, Dr. Ramona, for your personal testimony and as always, the information from our panel of doctors. So we thank you so very much. Want to remind everybody to get your COVID boosters. It is so important to make sure you get boosted. If you haven't been boosted, get boosted. If you haven't been vaccinated, Get vaccinated. It is so very important. And don't forget to get your flu shots or whatever other vaccines, the shingle vaccine, whatever else that you are needed, the pneumonia vaccine, make sure you get it. Let's stay healthy. You know what, Ramona, I'm going to do something tonight that we never do. Usually the congressman wraps us up and takes us home. Tonight, that's going to be your job. Take us home, Ramona.
Ooh, okay. That's such a large responsibility. But again, I want the audience to walk away with a feeling of empowerment. You are worthy, no matter whether you're man, woman, going against the world, trying to be your best professionally or dealing with health issues. You are worthy. So that's the takeaway message for tonight.
Good evening, everybody. See you next Monday. Bye now.